Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we are releasing a bonus episode. This is an interview that I gave recently on the Connected by Controversy with Chris White podcast. Professor Chris White teaches history at Marshall University. We actually hosted him on this show, Boundless Body Radio, back on episode 56. We have also hosted him on our sister podcast, which is called the How to Make a podcast, back in season 2 on episode 11. Connected by Controversy is a really great podcast that has really interesting episodes about controversial topics, but it addresses them in really meaningful and respectful ways and respectful conversation. In this episode, I talk a little bit about the controversies in nutrition. We spent quite a bit of time talking about plant-based diets, which are very popular now, versus more animal-based diets that we promote here at Boundless Body, and what the difference in those is as far as quality. We also talk about the calories in, calories out model of weight management, which, as we talk about, can be true, but there's a lot of caveats to it. We even covered religion, which was really interesting. We talked about the culture here in Utah and my past experience with the Mormon Church, something I don't think I've ever really talked about over the air. So we really hope you enjoy this episode. If you get a chance, please rate and review the Connected by Controversy podcast. It really helps them to get more listeners. And without further ado, here is my appearance on Connected by Controversy.
Hello, and welcome to Connected by Controversy. I'm your host, Chris White. Today, we'll be talking to a friend of mine who has interviewed me on his podcast, Boundless Body Radio, and who I've had on my previous podcast, COVID in West Virginia. We're basically going to enter into a conversation about all of the controversial ways in which the wellness industry has been discussed in recent years. So it's kind of a back and forth conversation about this very controversial issue in our society, which is, what are we supposed to eat? And there's a big question mark on many people's minds in our country about that very thing. And this used to be completely natural to us when we were hunter-gatherers for hundreds of thousands of years. Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, Homo habilis. Even going back before that, we were completely dependent on the life cycles of the earth, and we were able to nourish ourselves and prevent the rise of pandemics. And we only had a couple million of our species on the planet at any given time. Now we have corporate agriculture, corporate food production, just like we spoke about with Joel Salatin and Keith Brown a couple weeks ago. And this is a dilemma for health and fitness, as our guest Casey Ruff faces every day with his personal training business out in Utah. Another little announcement before we get into the conversation with Casey is that we're going to be upping our episodes to 2 per week, because there's just that many great authors and great experts out there that we can discuss on this show, Connected by Controversy. If you have any ideas about great authors or experts who grapple with the controversial issues of our day, don't hesitate to get in touch with me at whitec@marshall.edu. And please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Dr. Chris White, and to give us a review on YouTube or on Buzzsprout or Spotify or Audible. And just to remind everybody too, the whole point of this podcast is really to enter into conversations with people who have really dedicated their lives to trying to understand as much truth as it is possible about these controversial issues that divide and connect us. Because I really do believe that a lot of times we're just arguing over the same things, whether it's about evolution and religion, or it's about any other issue in politics, voting rights, race, gender, sexuality. I think we actually do have a lot more in common with one another than we think, but the rhetoric has become so divided that we're not even talking to each other. And so this is an effort to try and get us talking to each other, but based on some standard, a high standard, in fact, of mutually agreed upon, fact-based, evidence-based information. And so much of the problem is that we have conspiracy theories and religion and political party rhetoric that is dividing us. And so I'm just trying to be part of the conversation. I'm just trying to facilitate a higher level of conversation about these issues, because I think when we talk to each other as much as possible, then that facilitates bonding and connections. And connections are really what have made us move forward as a species, as is the case for all other social animals around the world. So without further ado, I'm going to get into our conversation with Casey Ruff. On my end, I'm recording you as being sideways.
That's so weird.
I know.
Does this help?
Yeah, actually, yeah, that did.
I'm not sideways anymore.
Cool. Yeah, but are you sideways to yourself?
Nope, I'm good.
Oh, how funny. How funny.
I'm sideways to myself in other ways. How's that?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, like the movie.
Exactly.
Yeah. Did you ever see that?
Yeah. I have. Yeah, really good. Really good. Makes you want a glass of wine.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That was an area of California that I'd never seen before until that movie. I always associated wine country with Napa Valley, Northern California, But they're talking about this area in Southern California, which I'd never even heard of before. But it's like this pocket between LA and kind of Central California that I'd never gone to before. We went there a few years ago, though, and saw those same towns. And
oh, wow.
Yeah.
I actually forgot that about the movie, that it was set there. I would have assumed Napa as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's what, I think it makes the movie in some ways unique, because like Paul Giamatti's character and his friend too they're more like a product, I think, of the Southern California lifestyle. It's much more, at least of that period of time, late 90s, early 2000s, maybe I guess mid 2000s when it was made. But they're kind of like, they live in, there's like his friend is kind of marrying into a rich family, and that's a lot more typical. Right. Armenian family, that's where the Armenian population is in California too. And then Paul Giamatti is this kind of depressed, alcoholic 8th grade teacher.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, it's been a minute, clearly.
Right. Yeah. But it's things like that too that are kind of indicative of the way that I think society is going, to connect it to your podcast, Boundless Body Radio. It's, you're really talking about lifestyle choices that can be made in an informed manner based on exposure to experts, people who are living life in an intense way and kind of fine tuning their choices and their lifestyle choices based on the new available research, rather than kind of just going along like the Giamatti character. As I see it, he's going along, but he's trying to seek something greater too, through wine and the relationships. He's trying to get something better, but he's kind of, whenever he has a problem, he falls back on the drinking, which is not a good wellness choice.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great comparison.
And, so a lot of the people that you interview are people who are just kind of talking about these areas of research that I hadn't thought of before. Each time someone comes up with, that you interview, it's like, wow, how did they get that kind of perspective? Can you just kind of talk about some of the latest guests that you've had?
Yeah, it's really amazing. We're always very, humbled by the guests that choose to appear on a show, including yourself. This was such a great episode. We loved hosting you as well. It's amazing. It's really cool to find people who have really honed in on one particular area of research and have dedicated their lives to knowing that one thing for as deep as they can possibly go. And so they end up being world experts on it and have different perspectives and ways to consider things that most of us might not really consider. One that really stands out that we got on very recently, he just published a book. His name is Dr. Bill Schindler. He's not too far away from you. He's kind of in your area of the world. And he's an archaeologist. Like I said, he just put out a book called Eat Like a Human. And his whole kind of premise is that humans are really just not well designed to eat hardly any of the foods that we eat. So that's kind of a strange statement and really kind of caught me off guard. And what he means is, as humans, we have incredibly weak digestive systems. We don't really ferment cellulose from plants very well. We're not like a cow, but we also don't look like carnivores, right? We have teeth that don't look like carnivores. Our digestive systems kind of match up with carnivore, but are slightly different depending on the animal. And so how are we able to eat hardly anything and still be an omnivore? And his whole argument and area of research is all about technology. And again, his argument is that when one primate struck a rock against another rock 3 million years ago, that basically changed the course of humans for the rest of our evolution. We are able to process our calories outside of the body through technology, through fire, through cooking, through soaking and fermenting, and all the different ways that we can treat plants to help get rid of the toxins that they carry. Another one of his arguments just says eating a plant should scare the hell out of you. And he eats plants, and he's not suggesting that it's not okay to eat plants, but he's suggesting that we need to be mindful about how many plants we consume, which ones we consume, and most importantly, in his opinion, like how we're preparing those. What steps are we taking to make sure that food has the maximum amount of nutrients for us to absorb and a minimum amount of anti-nutrients or toxins that can become really problematic for people, especially over the course of a long life. So it's just a really interesting concept and a really interesting way to think about our food and the things that we eat. Again, the argument isn't that we're not omnivores, we are, but we don't need to rely on things inside the body to digest and prepare our food for us. We do that outside of the body, especially with cooking. I thought just super interesting.
Oh, yeah. It kind of reminds me of the way that Michael Pollan put it. And I want to swing back around to him because he has a different perspective, I'm sure, than the archaeologist. But he talks about cooking as almost like an external stomach where you're going through, that's the first part of processing to break things down and how important cooking is, as opposed to what the raw food movement is trying to say, which is, we should go even further back to before we started cooking food, like that's an evolutionary thing that goes back to, Homo erectus even, whereas, that's what's really interesting to me is that there are so many different perspectives on this that it becomes very difficult to land on something and say, yeah, I'm going to agree with this professor, or I'm going to agree with this author. How do you, yeah, right?
Welcome to nutrition.
Yeah, right.
It's tough, man. It's really tough. There's compelling arguments on so many different sides. The way I like to describe it when I'm explaining what I do and where my expertise is, I explain it like I picture me as like a car salesman for Ford or something like that. Like you just wouldn't come to me if you wanted a Chevy. And by the same token, it wouldn't be a really good strategy for me to sell Fords by screaming at the top of my lungs how awful Chevy is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Everybody kind of has their camp and there can be some infighting with people. I think it's fair to know that everybody's just a little bit different and they can find whatever works out best for them. At the end of the day, that's the best thing to do. But you're right. It's very difficult whether people are doing it intentionally or whether they're not doing it intentionally. There's a lot of deception out in the nutrition world, the training world. The food industry is a big thing. You can believe what you want about some of those things, but there is a lot of money to be made and a lot of money to be lost when somebody chooses a healthier lifestyle that isn't exactly the conventional way of doing things or thinking about things. So it's tough. I don't blame people for, being really confused about stuff. I mean, look at the documentary Game Changers. Game Changers came out on Netflix, 3 or 4 years ago. It was, directed, produced by, now I'm going to forget his name, dude from Titanic.
Oh, DiCaprio?
No. The director from Titanic.
Right.
what's his name? Anyway,
Cameron.
he owns, James Cameron. He either owns or has a lot of money invested into plant-based protein as a supplement. And he produced that show, and they tell a lot of very deceptive stories about people and flash really quickly a bunch of studies over and over and over on the screen. So it looks like it's scientifically backed. But when you start to take those apart one by one and see what's really going on, it's complete nonsense. And again, that's not to say that somebody can't be vegetarian or vegan or plant-based if they want to, but the arguments that are made for many different reasons can be extremely deceptive. And it's really challenging for people that are trying to do their very best. They think they're doing, the very best by themselves, getting the best nutrition, doing the best for the planet. And it's just, a lot of times it's not true.
Right. The one claim that stood out to me the most, like I could almost buy quite a bit of those claims. Like there's a point when we're talking about, athletes like in the NFL who are improving because of a vegetarian or plant-based diet. And it's like, well, maybe so. Maybe they had worse diets before, but there's no really compared experiment going on there, right? We're just supposed to believe that they got better. But when they start getting into the scientific stuff, like when he does that workout with the ropes and he's able to go beyond an hour, which is supposedly like 7 times longer than he ever was before based on a plant-based diet. Are we really supposed to believe you have a 600 or 700% increase in your cardio capacity because you switch over to plants? And they make it seem very scientific. There's even one so-called expert who claims that there's no bacteria in our gut that historically that can process meat, or animal-based products. And, it's just almost like it's going too far. It's going beyond even what the China study did. China study, I remember that activated several of my friends. They got really excited about that. And they just said, well, it's a no-brainer. You won't get cancer anymore if you're less likely to get cancer than if you go to an all plant-based diet. But then this one is, which is, obviously that's not true either. But with this one, it was almost like just motivating people to become vegan instantly because it was such an exciting documentary.
Yeah,
Schwarzenegger was in it even.
Right. No, it was very well done. They got some really high-end people to do it with them. And then they made a really good production out of it. And I mean, there were times while I was watching it where I was like, well, dang, maybe I should be more plant-based or vegan. Like, it's really convincing until, again, you deep dive into these studies and you find a lot of them are epidemiological, which means you're looking at a population based and making assumptions based on things like food frequency questionnaire. So this is a good example of the China study that you already mentioned. It's just you're looking at a large population, assuming that one thing causes another thing to make a claim when there's no proof. You did not show any kind of proof. It's like if you woke up this morning and the sun came up. Okay, well, were you the one that made the sun come up? Well, maybe not. If you die tomorrow and the sun comes up, then we can reasonably say, well, Chris White wasn't the one that made the sun come up. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah.
What I mean? And we draw a lot of conclusions there. And those are the things that get the headlines when the science is just really very poor. And frankly, again, whether it's intentional or not, it's just, again, it's bad science. It's deception. And it makes people think that certain things are very unhealthy for them. And if they only eat in this way that's being promoted, which is, if you think about it, extremely weird in the way that we would have evolved, well, people believe that and they pay the price for it later on. It's a shame. It sucks.
Definitely. I'm glad you brought up that point about, that there are people who stand to profit financially from this. And we don't like to think that that's the case, but if we decide to turn on that Netflix documentary, we've somewhat committed to watching it, and then it's hard to just kind of sift through. I mean, that's why I think documentaries and films in general are very problematic. When people start watching them, they have to go in with the mindset that this has been produced by people for a certain interest, usually for some type of a gain. And especially if there's a lot of production value behind it, like Game Changers or like the China study, then you can see that they're crafting the way that they frame everything, the narrative, the language, the music, That's a telltale sign for me. Every time there's music behind something, it's like they're trying to tip the scales. Like, why do you really need that music in there? Shouldn't they already know how to feel? But you're telling them how they should feel, gloomy or excited or what have you.
Yeah, totally. And you should play gloomy music when you look at the list of all the athletes that appeared in that show, which I have an Excel sheet of everybody who had appeared in the show, and shows what ended up happening to them if they stayed vegetarian and vegan, or if they got injured, if they retired. And it's pretty shocking to see what happened to a lot of those athletes. Maybe they were very temporarily vegetarian and vegan and stopped, or maybe they suffered an injury, which I would argue strongly correlates with the things that they are nurturing their body with.
Interesting. Yeah. So there were, there's not like a before and after for that documentary. I guess it's going on.
You definitely don't want one. You don't want one.
2 or 3 years now. And then Rogan had him on, and he was debating somebody else. Somebody who was a more carnivore based, right?
Chris Kresser. Yeah. Chris Kresser. This is the only one I'm aware of. Chris Kresser believes in kind of more ancestral health. He is a little bit more on the meat is not bad for you side of things. Although I know if he still promotes this, I guess I'm not sure, but up until, the point that I last heard from him, he does promote eating, vegetables and things like that, which is totally fine. But yeah, debates are tough in that scenario. I feel really bad for Chris Kresser because you can do as much research as you want, but you still don't know what that other person's going to say and what they're going to bring. It's almost like a debate like that. You should really treat like a trial or a case or something where each side, the prosecution and the defense gets to see each other's materials, and you can't pull a fast one on trial day and pull up some new evidence. Like, it's only fair if everybody knows what everybody else is talking about. And the dude, I can't remember who made the movie, but the dude was a really good debater, and it was, Chris kind of got murdered in that debate, and he got talked over, and it was hard to watch. And debates, I think, are tough also because of that.
Yeah, because you can add style to it, and if your personality is more type A, and you're more inclined to just kind of do a machine gun rapid fire and try and slay your opponent that way, then that's not operating in the same playing field as the other guy who's trying to be more measured in what he says, and he's careful about it. He's not really trying to win the argument necessarily. And credentials matter, credibility matters. Just because the guy who made it was a fighter doesn't mean that he is adept at assessing all of the science behind this either. Whereas somebody like Gary Taubes is. Gary Taubes is that's all he does is to sift through the scientific literature, and historical literature. Gosh, the cases that he makes in all of his books, especially about the Pacific Islanders, people who were once just dependent on fish and coconuts, how their health was so much better than what became afterwards when they were conquered and colonized.
Yeah, totally. No, I have one of Gary Taubes' books right behind me, The Case for Keto. And yeah, the depths that these people go to do this research is quite profound. I mean, they take a long, long time to research. They are backed up really, really well. If you're going to make claims in this space that fat is not bad for you, that meat is the most nutrient-dense food that you could possibly eat, that vegetables in some cases can actually be harmful for people, you've got to come with a lot of scientific, backing to say something like that, because you are swimming right upstream with the normal message and the normal dietary guidelines that come out every 5 years from the U.S. government. And so if you're going to make those claims, you got to know what you're talking about. The thing I like about Gary, the thing I like about Nina Teicholz, who's the author of The Big Fat Surprise, is that they're journalists. They have an interest in nutrition. And of course, over the years, they have become experts in nutrition. But originally, these were stories that were given to them to go do. And they just did what a journalist would do, is just ask questions. And things start to get a little bit fishy. People are ignoring you, not returning your calls. All of a sudden, you start to realize like something's going on here. Something's being suppressed and not told to the American people. And they just decided to deep dive into it and tell that story. They didn't come from the medical background. They weren't biased. They didn't have any nutritional, education, quote unquote, education that was given to them. They had to go research it themselves. And again, if you're going to make some of these claims, which are completely outlandish, if you've been following nutrition for the last, 100 years, then you got to come with some science.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the big fat surprise too. That interview with Nina was incredible because, oh my gosh, it's the first time I really learned about those. What is it? The like the Crisco and like the way that it's like industrial solvents basically, right? It's what we've been putting in our bodies for so long.
So gross.
And that's the kind of thing that so many of, like in academia, it's so hard for like a historian or anthropologist or what have you to get at that kind of a story where you're looking, where you're going into the factories and you're going into a lot of, you're interviewing people as well and getting kind of the relevance of things right now, the story right now. And you can specialize it and get paid for that too. So many times the journalists have kind of a much stronger grasp on this topic.
Yeah, totally. And again, they're unbiased. Like Gary Tops doesn't get a cut if you get a steak at a restaurant. He's not taking any commission.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And he isn't going up against, that in the academic community too, you're going up against the kind of dogma of the academy. And sometimes that even prevents people from doing the kind of research that would challenge that, not all the time. It's just that you have to be prepared to, it's like, how is that story going to fit into the broader research pantheon? And whereas with Taubes and with there's another one. What is it? Salt, sugar, fat. Also, that
the Dorito effect, I believe.
What's that?
Is that what it is called? It's called the Dorito effect. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, the book is Salt, Sugar, Fat. The author's escaping me right now, but he's looking at how these chemistry PhDs from Harvard and all that were able to come up with these chemicals in food additives back in the 60s and 70s to create the bliss point and mouth feel and all that, to get people hooked.
Yeah, totally. No, there's a specific, combination of those things that hits dopamine receptors in our brain to be maximally, just makes us so happy. And that mechanism is a really, really good thing. We've evolved with that, which is great. If you think about where, you or I live, kind of more temperate climate. I'm looking outside right now. It's about 32 degrees. Like there's not food. I can't walk around my neighborhood and collect a bunch of food right now, even in a natural landscape. We're in the middle of winter. So I need to rely on any food that I find when food is growing, when plants are growing. That's the time to collect and maybe do some fermenting or soaking and preservation of those foods so that I can eat them at a time like now where those foods are just simply not available. Like in a normal environment, I would not have the ability to walk to a grocery store down the street and buy an apple 365 days out of the year. Like that's really weird. That's extremely bizarre, but that's all we've known coming up in this system. And so we just think that it's normal when it's actually a very, very new kind of a thing. So when we see that, we don't see a lot of obesity until the 70s and then it skyrockets. We don't see a ton of type 2 diabetes until the 60s, 70s, then skyrockets. Same with cancer, same with hypertension, same with all of these chronic issues. It just seem to be coming up out of nowhere to the point that I think it was 2018, there was a study that was done that showed that it was 12.5% of Americans are considered metabolically healthy. So 88.5%. And this is a few years ago. I don't think things have gone in the right direction since then anyway, are not healthy. So then you have to look around and you have to decide like, okay, well, what changed? What's different now? Why are all these people getting fat and sick when we know studying skeletons from, 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, they were robust, they were strong, they, were much taller. Their brain was actually a few hundred cc's bigger than our brains currently, which means our brains are shrinking. And you have to look around and say, okay, well, what things have changed? Well, we had an agricultural revolution where for whatever reason, we started to settle down in very specific spots on the planet. And we started to rely on grasses, which we domesticated, but they in turn domesticated us. And we could grow our population. We could have food for that population. But now we just invented, grains and all these things to be eating. And so now you have to protect it. You have to go take over other lands. You need governments, you need militaries, you need all these different things. That changed. That wasn't always like that before. And that changes the formula. Same with the industrial revolution. So you look around and you think, okay, we have not had vegetable oils, for more than 150 years. Sugar was exceedingly rare. It was either seasonal in something like fruit or honey, or it was just really hard to find, and only the ultra elite could ever afford any until we learned how to make that production much, much cheaper and get sugar shipped out all over the world. So that's relatively new. And also continuing the domestication of grains. We have grains now that yield way more than crops used to, again, 100 years ago. So all of those things are changing. Those are the new things. Why are we not suspecting the new things as causing all the new problems? But what we're doing is using all the new things to make a bunch of money and blaming all the old things that we've always done for hundreds of thousands of years and saying, oh, well, you shouldn't eat meat. Meat's going to kill you. Like, that's not true. None of that's true. We would have obligatorily had to hunt at some point. We need animal foods, and our bodies are optimized for that. And so it's a really confusing message, but it's a way to make money. We're creating problems for people and then selling them solutions in the forms of pills or supplements or workout programs and diet plans and all these, fake foods and fake meat. It's so bizarre when you sit down and think about it.
Gosh, yeah, no kidding. Especially now that we have this pandemic, which is really exacerbated by all these metabolic disorders that people have. And I've just been wondering about that so many times, like what would have happened if this specific virus had spread around the world back 100 years ago, before so many of these changes, or even 150 years ago. It's just, if we had the same scale of transportation, the speed of transportation and the scale of it that we have today, it just couldn't have burned through the population as quickly as it has been because of all these secondary problems that people have.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate the situation that we were in, but that was always going to be a problem in one way or another. At the very beginning of the pandemic, I wanted to be as respectful as I could when I said this, but I remember saying guys, this is why we were telling you, we told you, you need to eat well. You need to eat nutrient dense foods. You need to take care of yourself. You need to work out and build up resilience. You need to get outside and get fresh air and sunshine. Like, the vitamin D has turned out to be so important with this respiratory infection. Like, we were telling you all these things, and this is the reason why you need to be strong and resilient. So when the world turns upside down and something comes up, you can be strong enough to face it. And, some people hopefully took the advice, but unfortunately, I think money and industry wins the day. And a lot of people don't ever hear the truth or they are deliberately misled. It sucks.
Definitely. And people don't necessarily know how to decide what truth is. I mean, I'm constantly trying to figure it out too. We have to have kind of a standard for it. And I think one of the cool things is that there are areas of learning where the rubber hits the road, like as opposed to just general philosophy. Like if your guests who talk about the keto or the paleo or ancestral health, if they just talk about it, but they don't actually, practice on themselves, for example, or if you can't apply it in your own life too, or with your clients, then it's not valid. But in an area like wellness, fitness and wellness, you can apply it. Now, maybe they won't know necessarily for decades whether or not they're going to avoid something like cancer or heart disease. That's going to take a long time, but you can see in the way people's bodies transform and their minds transform too. Can you talk, how is it that you are applying that knowledge from the kinds of people you're interviewing and the books that you're reading to your practice?
Yeah, that's a really great question. You're right. At the end of the day, this is what we call an N of one, or this is just one person has to decide. And I as much as I feel strongly about the things that I eat and the things I promote for my clients to eat, I can't run their miles. I can't live their life. I can't eat the things that they eat. I can only tell them hey, this is what I would suggest. This is how I feel. Maybe you should try this. Maybe you should try that. At the end of the day, you as an individual has to make the decision about what you are going to put in your body. And that's a difficult decision, but I really strongly believe, for all the years that I followed different blood markers, different metabolic things that we can measure. I spent my whole career measuring the CO2 coming off the breath, which tells, me and my clients whether they're burning fat or whether they're burning carbohydrates. We have all these cool tools, heart rate variability, all that stuff. I really strongly think at this point, the best way to feel better tomorrow is by how you feel today. And so I think food is a really unique opportunity that helps show people that they can be feeling better. We're in this spot where some of these chronic diseases and illnesses and, all the things that ail us, they're so prevalent that we think they're normal when in fact they're just average. The average person is walking around with too much body fat. Maybe they've got skin issues, some type of digestive issue, IBS, IBD, diverticulitis I'm seeing a ton of. Maybe they've got allergies. Maybe they don't have great energy. Every day at 3 p.m., they're really, really tired and they need a nap or a pick-me-up or hit a sugar or something. Like all of those things are so ubiquitous and we look around and see that everywhere. So we just think it's normal when it's just average. Normal is to be thriving, is to have boundless amounts of energy. It's to wake up and not be tired and start your day and feel like you can go exercise. You can go play with your kids. You can go enjoy your life in a state of like gratitude and health. And I've seen so many of those diseases that people say, like, once you have type 2 diabetes, you're going to have it for the rest of your life. That's absolutely nonsense. I've seen it reversed in many, many, many people. And there's ongoing studies to show that it's way more effective to change a diet than to take any type of medication that we know of to help people out with things like diabetes and obesity. So at the end of the day, people have to decide what they want to believe and where they stand on certain things, but they need to be very honest with themselves by what changes they decide to make and how that is making them feel. You're right. Like, I think a lot of things will take a lot of time, and whether somebody dies of cancer or whatever, we don't really know. We can't really tell, and it might be too late by the time we figure it out, but we can change how you feel today. And if that makes you feel better, then you have something simple moving forward that you can change how you feel for the rest of your life.
Right. That's an important point. You can actually see the transformation and feel the transformation once you start losing weight and feeling your muscles getting stronger, whatever the goal ends up being. What kinds of different programs do you put people on, or do you have like a set program?
That's a great question. I don't have a set program. I consider having like a bunch of different tools, and we like to customize those tools for, what people think they need. So for example, I've been working with somebody recently just in my neighborhood, and she said that she got really good success when she was tracking macros. I think tracking macros kind of sucks and is really tedious, and I don't think it's necessary at all. That works for her. So we dialed up a plan and said, okay, if you can get your macros somewhere in this ballpark, you should be getting pretty good results. The most successful thing that I've ever done, the company I used to work with, we would do a challenge called the 90-day challenge. And obviously it's a 3-month challenge. People pay money to get into it. They do their weigh-ins. We give them a bunch of stuff that you're supposed to give people, like food lists and recipes and all this stuff to be able to, cook healthy meals and whatever. And then 90 days later, they weigh out and see what the change was. And when the company implemented this, they did quite successfully with it. So they changed it. Rather than doing 90 days twice a year, they did 60 days 4 times a year. So make a little bit more money if you do those programs. Yeah. And as trainers of the company, we were expected to go sell people on the program and get them signed up with us so that we could kind of take them through this process of 2 months of, weight loss. And it was just very difficult. People would weigh in. They would be very excited. We'd give them this big old stack of, recipes, lots of vegetables, lots of whole grains. They had to go to the store and shop for God knows how many different ingredients. One of my clients broke down and called me at like 8 p.m. saying she was looking for arrowroot powder at the store and couldn't find it and was so frustrated. She was crying in the grocery store. So anyway, we had this problem where like if you sold somebody on this contest, you weren't going to sell them again for the next one that was coming around in 3 months. And that's kind of a problem when we had specific numbers and goals that we had to set. And I remember one year we had a guy, he did really well. There's Rex and Tucker for the audience. They want to say hi as well. We had one guy do really, really well. And he won the contest and he signed up with us. And so we got a lot of, accolades and recognition for that. And he did it through this thing called keto. And I had been, a fan of eating more fat and more protein in a diet for, several years at that point. But it was the first time people were really starting to talk about keto as a diet. What is ketosis? What is ketogenesis? All these terms started to become more popular. So my wife, who's also a trainer, and I decided at that moment that we were going to change our program and just fly under the radar and do our own thing and give people what we thought was going to work best rather than shoving all the stuff that the gym was shoving down other people's throats. We were just going to do it our way. So this definitely wasn't a case study of any kind. It wasn't scientific, but we did have a lot of people that signed up. We were able to track a lot of people using a scale that measured not only weight, but also body fat, which means we could, somewhat scientifically validate whether people were losing weight, whether they were keeping off between contests. And we could show people whether that weight was, just general weight, including muscle mass, water weight, bone density, those kinds of things that you don't necessarily want to lose, or were people losing fat? And all I did during that contest was give them low carbohydrate meal plans that were very simple. They were for 2 or maybe 3 meals a day. Again, extremely easy, very few ingredients. They wouldn't have to spend a lot of time in the kitchen. We just told people across the board, like, find the recipes that are in these simple meal plans that you really like and just eat them. Don't count calories, eat them until you're very full, no portion controlling. We're not going to try to snack in between meals. We just want you to get really full and satisfied on these meals that focus on a lot of protein and a lot of fat. And the results were astounding. We had tracked over 100 people. I think it was 180 that we did in total. We found that our compliance percentage, people that weighed out of the contest, that started the contest, was much, much higher. We were up in the 60s% of people that were actually stick with the program throughout. And we showed it was 98.1% of the total weight that people lost, which I want to say for 126 people, I want to say it was somewhere in the 830 pounds. They had lost 820 of those pounds from fat. And so, again, this isn't a scientifically validated study, but this is a large group with people with vastly different goals, some men, some women, some weight loss, some wanted to gain muscle. But we showed that you could effectively, very effectively and simply lose weight, lose fat, not be hungry, and thrive. Why wouldn't you want to do that? It was such a cool thing and a cool validation. I knew the program could work, but I had no idea how successful it could be.
Man. And that is just so against what people think they need to do. I met so many people who they'll say, I'm a vegetarian, and they'll say it kind of with pride. And actually, I do know some vegetarians, like my aunt, but she doesn't, talk about it. It's not like a big source of pride for her. And she is incredibly healthy in her mid 70s. And I think it tends to, as opposed to just the vegetarianism, it's something about maybe portion control or genetics, who knows? But a lot of the people that I know who talk about vegetarianism are not really focusing on the healthy part. It's just avoiding meat, and so there's a lot of pizza eating and bread and things like that. And that, that's where you start to get into the Pacific Islanders problem, where they're so much reliant on these processed foods that ends up actually causing disease.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I think most listeners can do the thought experiment with me where let's all go and grab lunch. Let's make it a really quote unquote healthy lunch. So we'll go to a place that sells salad. We'll get some chicken breast. We'll use a very light salad dressing with, it's filled with canola oil or whatever. And everything stays kind of low fat, lots of vegetables, the way we're told to eat. And we'll eat that meal. And I would submit that we will leave the restaurant feeling like, okay, I feel pretty good. I'm full. I definitely, don't need to eat anymore right now. How do you feel 3 hours later? And again, I would submit that most people are probably feeling starving, very, very, very hungry. And now you're probably not craving a salad. You're probably craving something like caffeine, sugar, granola bars. I've seen the way office buildings are stocked with all of this stuff all the time now. It becomes very easy to get into the cycle of up and down and up and down. You're hungry, then you eat, then your blood sugar goes up and you feel good. Then your blood sugar crashes and you feel terrible and you need that pick me up again and again and again and again. And the food companies are so happy to keep selling you foods that will never make you feel full. They will make you be hungry. You will not be able to eat one Dorito. You're not going to be able to eat one bag of Doritos. That's the way it happens. And that keeps the system going. And it's only when people start to realize wow, I need to become really satiated. What's going to make me so full and feeling so good with energy for hours that I don't even think about food? And then again, I would ask the listener to think about, eating an omelet, steak and eggs, something that has a lot of those fats and proteins, and you eat them to total satiety. Like the last time you had a steak and you just couldn't even eat another bite. You can go hours and hours. You don't even think about food. You don't want to snack. You can go out and do other things. That's the kind of feeling that we want people to have. And ironically, that state that the body is in when it's fed fats and proteins makes it more ready to burn fat as a fuel source. And all of a sudden, all of this fuel that you have stored all over your body for years and years and years in the form of excess fat is available for you to burn off. And the body can say, well, great, I don't need to eat. I already ate. I ate to excess. I've got some calories here. Maybe I'll burn those off, and then I'll burn these off. And people lean out without feeling hungry. That's like the magic grail of how anybody would want to feel. It's really amazing. And again, we would just say that, everybody's a little bit different, but I think most people could benefit from adding in more of those fats and proteins and just really paying attention to how they feel.
I can definitely attest to that myself too, where you just don't feel like you have to eat anymore, and you can just sense that the meat is very slowly digesting in your system, and of course the fact that it came from an animal that basically you're taking all the nutrients that they've consumed in their period of life too. That shows the nutrient density of eating.
That's right.
Too.
That's right. The best way I've heard this described is it's in our same operating system. So an animal is in our operating system. It works well with the way we digest food, with how much stomach acid we have, which the way our small intestines and large intestines are built. It jives really well. We're able to absorb, like you said, very nutrient dense foods. And, eating the other things, other plants, it's a different operating system. It may not work all that well because you're not set up to do that. Again, you don't have 4 stomachs like a cow does and a rumen to ferment all the cellulose and grasses. And, I think in the best case scenario, eating a lot of plants and vegetables and things like that can be neutral for people. And I certainly just tell people, like, look, if you like certain vegetables, especially if you prepare them the right way, I don't have a big problem with that. That's totally fine. Some people just get this look like I'm growing a second head out of my neck when I tell people the following, that some plants can actively be really bad for you. They carry toxins, like we talked about earlier, that if they're not dealt with properly, they can do a lot of damage in the human body. We interviewed about a month ago, Dr. Sally Norton. Or I'm sorry, she's not a doctor. Sally Norton is her name. She is a world expert in oxalates, which come in certain foods like spinach. And they can build up little crystals all over the body over a period of time, over a lifetime, that can cause all kinds of problems with people with their vision, their joints, their guts. These things can jam up all over the place. And the body, if it's getting too much of oxalates, there's no good way for it to detox all of it out. And so it's really horrific when I hear about people that are eating lots of almond flour, they're doing spinach smoothies in the morning and grinding up a bunch of whole other like high oxalate foods. And then they have joint problems later on down the road when they thought they were doing themselves a service by eating all these vegetables. And it's just, it can be really problematic. I would really recommend somebody, any listener who's interested in that, to go look up that episode and prepare to have your mind blown, because it's shocking the things that she's learned about oxalates and how she helps people get off of them and the results she gets. It's incredible.
Man, yeah, I hadn't even heard of that term, oxalates, before. So that's great.
Oxalates, lectins, we call them phytonutrients. The truth is plants don't want to get killed and eaten any more than we do. And we have technology, we can run away, but a plant is pretty defenseless. And so you really want to be thinking about, okay, which parts of the plant does the plant really want to protect the most? Probably roots, probably stems, probably leaves, definitely seeds. Those are going to be where you're going to find the most plant toxins to discourage, small animals or insects or whatever to kill them. That's their chemical defense. And with humans, we don't have an acute reaction, generally speaking, if we have spinach. There's not enough oxalate in one bowl of spinach. But if you're doing that every single day, you may notice some of those problems, especially when they come from those parts of the plant that really don't want you eating them. Now, something like fruit is totally different. Fruit tastes really good. That's where the seeds are. We eat those. Those seeds are so defensive that we just, we get rid of them in the same form that they came in. And for the plant, you just benefited the plant because you probably excreted those seeds somewhere else with a bit of your own fertilizer, and there might be a new apple tree. That's what the apple tree wants to do. So it's just thinking about those things and being really mindful about which plants you decide to include and how you prepare them.
That's great. Yeah, I like that. Exactly. Another example of something that people can learn by listening to your podcast. And it's, a lot of the other things that you have on there are interesting too. Like you recently interviewed a gentleman who survived survived 9/11. He was in the North Tower. That's incredible. This is one of those areas that I I teach about a lot in my class, the history leading up to 9/11 and also the events of that day, because it's just so important. And the survivors' stories are, it must have been really difficult to kind of to imagine what that person was going through, but he was so forthright in what he was saying. You talk about that interview and how you got him on board.
Yeah, Kushal Choksey, what an amazing dude. He was born in India, and he came here for financial success, which he was really good with developing systems behind some of the financial markets to, see trends and things like that. And he was making a lot of money, wasn't particularly happy. It was a very stressful life. And he was in the north tower of the building when the first plane hit. And everybody was in complete pandemonium and shock. Security guards were telling people to go to the center of the building, not to go outside because there was a lot of debris flying around. And he just decided to get the hell out of there. So he exited the building just in time to see the South Tower get struck. He describes that he was the last person to get on the very last ferry that left Manhattan. He literally said he had to jump from the dock to the boat to catch the ferry that goes to Weehawken, New Jersey. And he definitely had some trauma after that, which he dealt with meditation. He didn't develop a meditation, but he found one and became very passionate about that, and now spends his time sharing that message of mindfulness and meditation with the world, which is such an amazing message. Such a well-spoken guy. It was a real honor to interview him. I think it's really relatable to health and fitness. I think all of us have different traumas, and all of us could use, breathing techniques and more mindfulness techniques and meditation to help us out. And so, we were grateful. I believe his was one that some of his people were reaching out for different podcasts to be interviewed on, and we were more than happy to have him on. It was great to talk to him.
Yeah, he was incredibly humble, and you can just get the sense that that he really recognizes how lucky he is to this day.
Yeah,
to have survived that.
Totally.
Gosh,
amazing story.
Yeah, and actually, it occurred to me when you were talking about that example of the security guards. That happened in both towers, and there are all these stories from people who survived where they talk about security guards or people getting on the PA, people who had some kind of influence, at least getting on the PA and saying, everything's okay, just go back to your offices. And the fact that some people were like, screw that, I'm leaving, even though there's debris and people falling from above.
Yeah.
That's really what I'm so interested. That kind of that decision point in between. What is it that divides the people who decide to discard the authority and make a different choice? And what is it that makes people go, yeah, I'm going to trust this authority? It can't be absolute intelligence. There's probably not something more intelligent about the 3,000 or so or 9,000 or so people who actually made it out of the buildings and the people who stayed in. I mean, a lot of the people who died were above the crash sites in the North Tower, so they couldn't get out at all.
Right.
But a lot of the people were people who actually left and then went back up. Well, some people were rescue workers, of course, but others were people who were encouraged to go back into the building because they actually did think it was safe, and then they died.
Yeah. Do you ever think about what you would do in that situation?
Definitely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I always think about is what if, especially with the firefighters, so many of the firefighters were told in the North Tower to get out, and they didn't. They said, no, I've got to save these people in 10 or 50 floors above. They were so compelled to keep going.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I think I really like the practice of Stoicism that involves negative visualization. So in the beginning, this was a little confusing to me, and I thought it was kind of dumb, but you really put yourself in this position of imagine what the worst thing that could possibly happen is, or put yourself in a situation that would be absolutely terrible, like that one. And it's really unpleasant, but it gives you a chance to consider, like, wow, I'm really grateful that I have this thing. I know that, one day my house isn't going to be here. My car is going to be broken down. I'm going to appreciate these things while I have them. And yeah, that can be something we can apply to that, is just picturing, what it would be like if we were there, and, how would we act? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the man with the red bandana. I can't remember his name now. He had like an interesting name. There's a documentary made about him, and he was in the South Tower, I want to say, and he was just like this volunteer firefighter, but he was like this young kid who was super fit, super athletic, and he was kind of known for, he wore this red bandana, and he would run up and down the stairs between a few different floors. The upper floor is like, I don't know which ones, but I think around the crash site on the South Tower. And then he ended up dying, but it was because of that kind of vigor. You know, he felt the vigor, and so he said, "I'm going to help these people who can't, who are stuck, and guide them down." That's what he knew. He knew which stairwell to get down. And yeah, and then he ended up dying. And so it's like something like 70 some odd people, they say he was responsible for saving.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow.
And so there's a whole diversity of people that you're talking to here. It's just great that that in Boundless Body Radio, you're able to get so many guests that are not just talking about health and fitness, but also things like virologists, like Rich Condit. Too.
Yeah, Rich.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was awesome. He was really fun to talk to when things were really confusing during the pandemic. And it's interesting, the podcast gives us the ability to reach out to people like him, people like you, experts in their fields all over the world, and say, look, would you be willing to have a 1 hour conversation? And, I do a second podcast now called the How to Make a Podcast podcast. So I take people through the podcasting process in case they want to start their own. And one of the things we talk about in that podcast is when you're doing one, you really need to decide, are you going to be more generalized? You're going to be more specific, and just understand that if it's more general, you might reach a wider group of people, but they might lose interest if you started talking about one thing and all of a sudden you're talking about something that's completely unrelated. But if you're very specific, you might only access a few people, but they might be a lot more loyal because they're super fascinated in what you're talking about. And we just decided early on that we wanted to have a really general type of a podcast. We wanted to be able to interview anybody. We've interviewed gold medalist Derek Parra in the building where he won gold medal, talking about himself, visualizing every stroke on his skate on all 3 laps that he had to skate in the 1500 meter where he won gold. And he would do it with his eyes closed at night, visualizing the whole thing, holding a stopwatch. And he would click the stopwatch that ended up matching up exactly with his splits that he skated during the Olympics. I mean, talk about like such a cool story. We talked about the virologist during the pandemic and what things we needed to do and what things, were being said that weren't necessarily true. And, talking to him about the vaccine really influenced us. Again, so many experts in the nutrition and fitness field. It's been quite a journey and a real honor to talk to people. And I mean, when I say, like, if nobody else downloads and listens to the episodes besides myself, I will be totally happy with that.
Because you can have a great, meaningful conversation with someone who can enlighten you too.
Yeah, definitely. And the cool thing is, once it's created. And so we're having so much fun now when somebody says, hey, like what running shoes should I get? Well, we've done 3 episodes about that. Let's give you these episodes that are already done to talk about the structure of the foot and what kind of footwear is best and what things to consider. And then you can go make your own decision. Or if somebody's saying like, hey, I heard, vegetables aren't good for me. Well, maybe you should listen to this episode with Sally Norton and decide how much spinach you want to be eating, raw spinach. And so once those things are made, these conversations like this one, this was nothing an hour ago. And now all of a sudden we've created something. It's pretty cool. And it gets to be shared, and hopefully it helps people out. It's great.
Definitely. And to that point, the more that I listen to podcasts and also just that I'm open to talking to people who have something to add to my own perspective, I just realized that the conversations themselves are really important, as opposed to consuming a documentary or watching a film or even reading a book. If you can have a conversation with people about something, you reach a different level of understanding too. And that's what I like. That's what I was thinking about with this podcast too. The idea that we're connected by controversy because there's so many issues. I mean, to me, I'm thinking beyond wellness too, but it's connected to wellness. And that is things like social justice issues and politics and nationalism and the role of the U.S. military and all these things are controversial. And the fact that people have these such diametrically opposed views on them, it's like the vegetarianism versus keto debate. But when you look at abortion, we're still yelling at each other over the same thing. Like people want a better life for their children and for the world. And so we focus on this issue, abortion or guns or terrorism. And even though we have a diametric opposition, I want us to be talking about it at least.
Yeah.
As much.
Yeah. I love that. I appreciate the approach a lot. I think all of us have opinions that are, strong, and we may have different reasons for having those, but I don't think that means that we can't just talk about it and, try to understand the other person. So I think that's a wonderful thing that you're doing, and something that's very much lacking in our society.
And I think that part of the problem, I don't know if you feel this way or not, part of the problem though, is that from the conservative perspective, and I'm not conservative, and that's why I'm using that term, but I think sometimes that the progressive or liberal or intellectual perspective talks down to, almost assumes that they know better than the other side. And that's what's such a big turnoff to people, as if to say, to say, well, I've read this book and therefore I know.
Yeah.
And what we find over and over again, though, is that, gosh, if you live your life like that and you're not really listening to the other side, then you can actually corner yourself even more. It's almost like Don Quixote is one of my favorite books. And that's an example of someone who lived based on his books. And he had this totally skewed vision of the world, because he wasn't interacting with the real world. It was all happening in his head, so he thought he was superior because he'd read all these books before, and it didn't apply to his reality at all. He walked into a world that was totally different than what he expected, but he couldn't adjust to it. So I think that's
a great point.
Yeah. One of the problems that we can have if we're just based on books. And that's what these, podcast conversations are so important.
Yeah. I think that the Social Dilemma, documentary that came out last year or the year before did such a good idea. And it was the first time I'd really considered, like, my Facebook screen is going to look vastly different than your Facebook screen. And like, you realize how they're capturing our attention and making us so polarized about everything. And so just having conversations and listening, truly listening to why somebody feels a certain way, I think is really important today.
Yeah. It's almost like an art that needs to be taught to kids. They teach them all these subjects that they have to consume, just drink down, and then we'll just kind of send you out into the world. But there are no classes on how to be a good friend, or on relationships, or on listening to people. It's all about trying to, sell people on who you are, almost like we're all billboards, And if you don't do that, then you're not somehow. It's totally different. I mean, when I lived in Mexico my junior year in high school, and it was just so much different there than it is here. I don't know if it's better necessarily, but it was all about the relationships.
Wow.
Family and friends too. Maybe, I don't know, you grew up in Utah, maybe it's different there too, because there's so much, there is so much community there, so much in common that people have too.
Yeah. That part I appreciate, but it can also get a little bit, divided. I didn't have this experience growing up, but I know tons of people, like, if you grew up in, the state's prominent religion, you might not be able to play with the kids who didn't. There was a lot of that happened around here. So it can get a little divisive. Like I said, I was fortunate to not get any of that per se, and was able to be friends with whoever. But yeah, there's some tribalism here as well that can be a little bit weird. My wife Bethany moved here when she was 23, and I just had to explain to her, look, it will take you a little bit longer to find your friends around here. They're going to be really good friends when you find them, but it is just a bit of a divided culture. So I think there's the image of happy families everywhere and that kind of thing, but we certainly have our issues as well, a lot of social issues. So yeah, it's kind of both ends of the sword, I guess.
Right. And so where did she come from?
She was Air Force, so she was really all over the place. She was born in Germany, but lived in many different states, where I grew up primarily here. And so we have totally different experiences. I had, friends that I've been friends with since I was 5. She's had to make new friends every new place she's been. We've been married coming up on 5 years, and this is the longest she's ever been in one place. And so she has a lot more culture and understands the, differences in people a lot better. And so it's an interesting mix. It's been interesting to kind of jive those two out and, compare our different experiences.
I bet. Yeah. Someone like that who hasn't been able to maybe put roots down, they can either sink or swim in that environment, right? You can because you can kind of develop a shell that says, oh, I'm not going to make friends anywhere. Or you could say, well, I have to learn how to adapt to every new environment that I go into.
Yeah, totally. That's exactly what happened.
And didn't you have a mission experience also when you were 18 or 19?
Yeah. So when I was I'm no longer affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormons. But yeah, as a young man growing up in the church, you are somewhat expected to do a 2-year kind of service mission. And so you submit a bunch of papers to the church. They assign you an area. You have no idea where you're going. You don't get any say in the matter. And so I was called to go down to Florianópolis in Santa Catarina, Brazil, which is down in the south. And had a really cool experience there. I wish I would have approached things a little bit differently. Obviously, as a missionary, you're trying to get people to join your church. And it kind of formed this polarity that, like, if you are already going to a church that you like, I would just say, like, wow, that's dumb. Like, you should come to my church because my church is the right one. Listen to a 19-year-old white kid from Utah. Like, just never really occurred to us. But yeah, it was wonderful people that we got to meet and work with. It's just a beautiful part of that country. So yeah, it was a great experience.
Man, yeah, I've known quite a few LDS and former LDS members who have gone on missions, and that's one thing that I've had mixed feelings about it too. It's like because I had friends that were part of the church growing up in Northern California also, and they would try and get me to join, but they also did have more of a worldly view in some ways than some of my Protestant or Catholic or even atheist friends, because there is that kind of perception within the LDS Church of being connected throughout the whole world. Like, they know people who have been to all these other countries, or maybe they've been there as well. And maybe you're trying to convert people, you have to learn about those cultures too.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that's why tech companies are moving here in droves. It's why MLMs are so popular here in Utah. You have this work base that has international experience and knows how to sell people. They know how to communicate with people. And so I think that's a huge reason why a lot of these companies are coming here, and Utah is just absolutely exploding with them at the moment.
And did you pick up Portuguese when you were there or beforehand, or what?
I did. Absolutely. So they shipped us right out to a training center in Sao Paulo. So besides, thumbing through a little guide or learning one or two words, we knew nothing by the time we got in the country. It was quite culture shock. But yeah, I'm proud to say that I was able to learned it pretty well, and actually I'm still fluent. I just ran into a Brazilian in my neighborhood last week, and we were able to carry on great conversation in Portuguese and have a lot of fun. So that was a cool part of the experience as well.
Oh, that's awesome. You were there for how long? 2 years?
2 years. Yeah, 2 years.
Man. That must have been great. When was that? In the 90s?
I did 2003 until 2005.
Oh, okay.
And it was an interesting experience. We always say, as missionaries, like, I wouldn't trade that experience for $10 million. I wouldn't do that experience again for $10 million. I think that's a pretty fair way to say it. While I was down there, my mom had breast cancer several years before, but she was mostly in remission. And when I got down there, her cancer got much worse and spread to her brain, and they gave her 3 months to live. And I'd only been down there for 3 months. And so we had a decision to make, whether I was going to stay, whether I was going to come home. And I remember talking with my dad and him saying, like, look, she's just getting worse. You're only going to see your mom get really sick and not be able to do anything. You might as well just stay down there. So I chose to stay, and she ended up getting better, and we had another few good years before she passed away in 2006. So it was a challenge in a lot of different ways. But again, I wouldn't trade that experience now for anything.
Right. Gosh. Yeah.
Just don't make me do it again.
Just to make it. So what was so difficult about it, though?
Oh my God. Okay. So the life of a missionary, at least where we were, like, you wake up at 6:30. You don't wake up at 6:31. You wake up at 6:30. You study through the morning for 3 hours. You have a set time where you're out on the street. We didn't have cars. We didn't have bikes. We walked everywhere. Everywhere. We walked. You're going into people's homes. You're trying to convince them to join the church. You have a short period for lunch. You have your afternoon where you're out working. You have a short dinner, and then you're back out until 9:30. Lights out are at 10:30, not 10:31, but 10:30. And that is 6.5 days a week. You are given part of a Monday to do things like send your family an email, clean up after yourself, maybe do some meal prep, like do your laundry, which we did in buckets. You're in that world, and you don't get TVs, you don't get phones, you can't communicate. We could call our family 2 times a year, once on Mother's Day and once on Christmas. And that's it. Like besides emails or letters, you're in that world, and that's all you can do. I understand that things have probably changed a little bit for people that are doing it now, but it's just pure walking and working and trying to get people to join our church. That was it. That was all I did for 2 years. No vacations, no breaks, no let's go play at the beach. Like there was none of that.
Wow, I didn't realize that. Is it the same way for people who do it stateside?
It should have been. And it depends on who is like the leader of your particular, mission. Like, I think I was fortunate. The guy who was in charge of ours, he wasn't so pushy on things like how many people you could baptize. So a lot of the problems that the church was having at the time in Brazil is that you would baptize thousands of people into the church, but your church attendance would drop, meaning you're just speeding people through this process, being buddy-buddy with these people so you can get them baptized, but they're not sticking with the church anyway. So what the hell is the point? And so, again, it depends on who is your leader. The leaders that really wanted to just show great numbers probably, didn't have missionaries that had a really good experience, where ours was like, look, if we don't baptize somebody, that's fine. Maybe see if you can paint their house or, fix their fence or something, like do some service and help these people out. And so, and that way I was really fortunate. But yeah, it's a religion. It's a business. Also, they collect tithing and do all kinds of stuff with it and hold real estate everywhere and have that bank account that has over $100 billion for who knows what. It's just, it's just like the food industry. It's just like the fitness industry. It's just a business. If I'm selling pharmaceuticals to you, well, I probably want you to be a customer as soon as possible. I want you to be a customer for as long as possible. And so I want you to be really sick at a really young age. And then I want to give you these pills that keep you alive in this unnatural, really sick state for 60, 70, 80 years. And that's how I'm going to make a lot of money. It's learning to look at, those types of things in those lenses and realize like, oh, this system is designed to make money for a certain purpose. I'm caught in this system, and you take whatever you can from it, I guess.
And how long did it take you? Well, I should say, anything that you don't want to talk about is just fine, But can you talk about maybe how long it took you to figure out that was actually what was going on, or did you see that going down there?
I didn't know. When you're in the system, like we call Salt Lake a bubble for a reason. Like when you're in it, your friends, you described your friends in Northern California. I already know they're vastly different than the people that came from Salt Lake and are near everybody who's also a member of the church. Like it breeds a whole different type of person. People in California, I know, are totally, totally different, way more laid back with certain things. When I left, it was more like, I just didn't feel like going for 1 week. And it was like every Sunday, that's what you do. You go to church and it can be like all day. And I just realized wait a second, if I don't go, nobody really cares. And I can go mountain bike or do something fun that I actually wanted to do. And then over time, once you distance yourself from it, you start to learn the actual history of the way things went down wasn't necessarily the same way they taught you as a young kid and taught you about Joseph Smith and how the church, spread from city to city because of prosecution. We were taught it was religious, where actually, Joseph Smith was going around, unconsensually marrying a bunch of people, had all kinds of different wives and all this stuff. The internet was a big problem for the church because people could go out and learn this stuff on their own. And, oh, this is really nuanced. This wasn't what you told me it was. But the thing that I had the most difficulty with over the years was the active battle against same-sex marriages. I can't align myself with that. And for an organization that claims to be as close to Jesus Christ as they say they are, and to do things that Jesus Christ supposedly did in the Bible, that never jived with me, that Jesus would really care if two dudes or two women wanted to get married. And not only to be opposed to it, because you're a church, you can be opposed to whatever you want. If somebody wants to join, great. You're a private institution. You should be able to believe whatever you want. But finding out that they were actively battling that and spending lots and lots and lots of money on Proposition 8 in California, I couldn't. That's not something I can align myself with. That personally just was not. That didn't jive with me.
Can you think of other people that you knew who had a similar problem around the same time?
Oh, tons. Yeah, tons. Of my core group of friends, it's definitely a majority of people that have stuck with it. Friends, family, lots of people. It gets to be really hard to reconcile over time. The way they treat people, again, the fighting against same-sex marriages, things that happen in the history of the church, how they denounce polygamy so that Utah could be a state. I mean, there's a laundry list of things that people end up finding out, and some people, they stay with it and it works really well for them. The church does an amazing job, teaching family values and really prioritizes families, which is, great. And they teach, to follow Christ and his teachings. And I think that has a lot of really good things. I look at somebody like my mom. The church was perfect for my mom. She loved it. She went every week. She was, obviously after you die, you're sainted anyway, but she was, it really helped her in her life, and she loved it and loved participating. And I think those people, that's great. Other people, I noticed a ton, again, especially as, things are coming out on the internet in the last 20 years, like so many people that I know have left, either formally or informally.
I imagine it's hard to get young people to stay on board because of the internet. Like you said, this thing like, people from like the millennial generation and Gen Z, they don't accept all this BS that the greatest generation was peddling for so long, and even the boomers and my generation, even we're still kind of contending with, I don't know, you're in your mid 30s, right?
Yeah, I am. Climbing 38.
Oh,
is that
38?
mid?
Okay, yeah. All right. So
mid?
Yeah, we're kind of the same. I'm 47, but like,
cool.
But I remember, too, people, like I never understood why we should oppose gay marriage. That just didn't make sense. But my parents' generation, it took them a while to accept that. But I imagine, people that are in their 30s and 20s and teens are just like, are you kidding me? You're grandpa. Why do you still care about this? We've solved this issue. There's no problems. You guys thought that the world was going to end if this happened. And then it happened. And guess what? Like I always like to point out, the most valuable real estate in the country is the most gay friendly place in the country.
That's right.
San Francisco.
Yep.
It says something about that. Google and Facebook, and then they want to be close by those kinds of places because they want it to be friendly to all people, and it's all merit based. Now, there's a cutthroat aspect to it, to corporate America, that I don't like. But you go there, and there are just tons of different shades of people's backgrounds and beliefs, and corporate America in that sense, at least, they don't care as long as you can do something that's going to be good for the corporation, then they'll accept it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I love that approach. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, definitely. Whereas in places that shall go unnamed, the more intolerant you are, then the people want to, they don't want to stay there. They don't want to invest there as much.
Right. Yeah, you see that all over the place. Definitely.
But it occurred to me too, when you were saying about your mom too, that it was good for her, that the church was good for her. There are so many good things that religion can provide, but it's almost like a yin yang kind of a thing where there are these positives and negatives, or blacks and whites, and shades that it's like in order to get all the good stuff of Mormonism or Seventh-day Adventism, for example, the good things about wellness and family too. In order to get that, then you also have to be exposed to all this other crap that can be detrimental too.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the way we were taught to pitch the whole thing. It's not a la carte. You can't choose which parts you like and which parts you don't like. So the way we would set this up is we would say like basically, like, if the Book of Mormon is true and the Mormons are the only one that have the Book of Mormon, then, if it's true, then you have to be a part of this church. This is the only one church, which we were told to tell everybody. All the other churches have part, but they don't have the whole. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormons, believe in the Book of Mormon. We have the whole thing, the whole shebang. So if the Book of Mormon is true, that means that Joseph Smith, was the founder and prophet that started the whole thing. And his whole thing was that he had a vision where he saw Jesus and God at the same time. And they told him, like, the real church isn't on the earth. I'm paraphrasing clearly. The real church isn't here, but you're going to be the one to bring our full church to the earth. And so we would set it up logically like that and tell people to go and pray. And if they had good, warm feelings about Joseph Smith having this vision, then all of the other pieces were, by logic, also true. B was true, and then step C was true, and step D was true. And so, you just had to get somebody to go and pray and ask that question. If they felt really good and tingly, then you should get baptized like right now. And that's the way we would try to sell it to people. So yeah, it's really black or white in that church. I don't know how other churches do it really, but yeah, you have to really kind of accept the whole thing, or you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Man, it's too bad because there is so much value in, I mean, I always go back to Mormons and Adventists because there are studies that show, that things like, that especially, rates of obesity are lower and cancer rates are lower and all that. And it's like atheists can't get that. I mean, I consider myself an atheist only in the sense that I just am not convinced by the magical aspects. That's how Joseph Campbell puts it like that. Like there's these magical aspects of the religions that I can't buy into because there's thousands of them, and how are you supposed to know which one's right? Kind of like with nutrition. But there are all these truths in there too on how you should treat people in general. When it talks about the people you should harm, then that's not good. But then there isn't like a non-religious type of group or cultural group of people or community that can provide that same kind of wellness that I've seen yet. And so in a way, what I mean is that we're all trying to seek, I guess, the best type of life that we should lead. At least I know I'm one of them, and people I've talked to throughout my life are seeking that too. But it's hard to figure that out on your own. And so if you're born into a religion, then you can get all those benefits of wellness, health in particular. I'm thinking about the kinds of things that Mormons eat, and the things that they don't eat and the things they don't consume, and how easy it is. Well, easier. If you grow up in a church like that and you're hanging out with some friends and they offer you a cigarette or a vape or a joint or a beer when you're 14, you can say it's against my religion, and maybe they'll contend with you. But if you can't say that, then the peer pressure might make you cave in.
Yeah, that's funny. It's funny now that you say that. The first time I was ever offered a drink was like kind of later in college. Like nobody had any of that around. You're right. It's like product of the environment. This is so interesting and ties back a little bit with some of the stuff we were talking about before. But do you know about Seventh-day Adventists and their role in nutrition today?
Not anything beyond just that there are certain health indicators that they're kind of known for hitting. Like I'm thinking like in Simi Valley is apparently there's a group over there that's better. Is there some kind of a new thing that I haven't heard of though? It's a really old thing, and it's a funny story, and again, kind of ties in with what we were talking about before. There's certain areas of the planet that have more centenarians than other places. An author who looked at this, I think he kind of cherry picked his data a little bit. There were some areas like in Iceland that also have high rates of centenarians that he deliberately excluded. But anyway, one of them is Loma Linda in California, and that's an area known for Seventh-day Adventists. And they do mostly plant-based. They also avoid alcohol and smoking, just like Mormons do. So you have these people eating plant-based diets. And again, if you look at this through the lens of epidemiology, you look at that group and you say, oh, wow, these guys are really healthy. Why are they so healthy? Oh, well, it's because they're eating vegetables. Well, it could also be they're not drinking, they're not smoking. They have very strong social ties, which I think is one of the most important things. There's all kinds of other different things. Almost all of the blue zones that I know of are on some type of incline, meaning people are moving their body weight at least up and down quite a bit. So there's lots of factors, but people, spot those areas and say, oh, it must be because of this one thing, or must be because of this other thing, when you can't parse that out. You can't know that just from looking at an area. But the whole reason that Seventh-day Adventists became more plant-based goes way back. I want to say the 1860s. I believe her name was Eileen White, who invented it. She had, her visions about the Seventh-day Adventists. And as part of what they were teaching, they were, teaching that you shouldn't be sexually promiscuous, but, boys would masturbate or whatever. So they figured out that if they fed the boys, rather than feeding them things like eggs and, meat for breakfast, they came up with feeding them grains. And this is in Battle Creek, Michigan. And the Kellogg's brothers were involved in this, also Seventh-day Adventists. All cereals came from that area and time to prevent children from masturbating. Wow.
you can't make this stuff up. And they don't hide it. That's the thing, is they don't care. They know exactly what they did, and they publish these kinds of things. The Seventh-day Adventists own tons of TV stations and newspapers and all kinds of media outlets. And they almost like brag about the fact that they have changed our nutritional guidelines almost by themselves through what they've, been telling people and teaching people and infiltrating, nutritional guideline committees and all kinds of different stuff. And they openly talk about it. Such a bizarre, funny story.
Gosh, no kidding. Yeah. To reduce teenagers' libido, right? Through these obviously not very nutritious foods, although that's what they thought back then.
Right. Your healthy whole grains, eat your Wheaties, like all this stuff.
Wheaties. Yeah. Crazy about that. My gosh. Yeah. Wheaties, just crazy. Like Gatorade too. Gatorade is like a obesity causer. It's totally. Like eating, like drinking Coke too.
Totally. Yep. Totally. Yeah. No, exactly right. Those are the foods that they know they can make so irresistible to you that are not satiating and don't provide any nutrition, which means you will continue eating and eating and eating those foods, seeking nutrition and not getting any. So you never turn off your hunger. And yeah, it's a great way to make a lot of money. It's a great way to get people really fat and sick. We talked about the pandemic and how people have not handled it that well if you're metabolically unhealthy. It's a really sad system, but that's what we've made for ourselves.
Man. Now, I like that you brought up that example of Loma Linda. And that's what I was thinking of too, because I've heard that so many times that because they have a plant-based diet, that's leading to the high level of centenarians. But there's so many other factors to it. The community aspect is something that I wish we emphasized more at school from the time that they're young, because the kids are learning that, obviously you let the kids go free when they're 4 and 5 years old and they create community on the playground. But then you start assigning grades, you start giving them individual work too, and you start to favor other kids over others. There's all this competition, and then you start to lose that kind of community for a lot of reasons. But that is what is keeping that's associated with reducing suicidal ideation, drug addiction, all that kind of stuff is through these lack of connections. When you start to see the fraying of these connections, and we are really a super organism, just like bees. You put somebody in solitary confinement, and that person, what do they have to live for? And by making kids feel that they're individuals too, that they're not really, it's not about everybody lifting up their boats together. That's part of the problem of capitalism, I think, unfortunately too. I believe more in capitalism and much more than in communism, just looking at history's sake. But
sure.
But one thing, like when I went to Cuba to do some research for my dissertation, 2003, I don't think it was the communist society necessarily that brought people together, but I did find that there was a lot more community there. It was like they didn't have to think about all the, like if you didn't have a corporate car or piece of clothing or shoes, because they didn't have any of that stuff, you don't have all those little ways of dividing people, then it does something for humanity, I think. Everybody really pretty much had the same amount of stuff, and so they were much nicer to each other in a lot of ways.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I think a situation like that with, a country with mostly closed borders, the same is true with those blue zones that we were talking about. The people that are born there die there, like they don't leave. And so I think you develop these deep relationships, and also what I would consider like a shared fate. Like we're all going through this together. If there's, a hurricane, we're all going to experience that together. And I think that does create a stronger sense of community. And, I think it's a cool thing now that we get to move around and check out different places, but maybe something is also lost where we're not always staying with the same people for an entire lifetime. It's an interesting question, interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, definitely. And it leads to this new geography of jobs, where people are like, well, I can't get a job here, and so I'll go elsewhere. And that fragmentation ruins families too, especially if you're talking about a traditional family environment. I always think about West Virginia, which has had population loss over the past 60 years. We've lost four electoral votes since Kennedy was elected. And
wow. I thought it was only Wyoming that was losing population. Wow.
Yeah. Well, and luckily in the past census, we didn't lose people. Like the past 10 years, we gained like 3,000 or 4,000 people, but for a long time we were losing. So we're supposed to have 4 electoral votes now. We used to have 8. And that's because the population is halved approximately. And so people grow up imagining what state they're going to go to outside of West Virginia. And the traditional place in particular is North Carolina. That's what, even when Trump actually was campaigning in 2016, a state senator mentioned, but before he introduced him, he said he's going to bring back coal, and our kids who went down to North Carolina are going to come back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. And I think that shows too, part of the reason why there is this pro-Trump wave in the past 6 years, unfortunately, because that senator, he wasn't talking about the wall. He was talking about the fragmentation of the families. If everybody in the audience could identify with that. And of course, that's tied in with corporate greed, the coal companies. But, he was tying it into saying it's the EPA and Obama that's causing these jobs. No, the jobs been leaving since the 50s, in fact, because of mechanization of coal and all that.
Wow. Yeah, so interesting. It's like we talked about before, like creating a problem and then selling a solution to the problem that didn't exist before. Like, good way to make money.
Definitely. Whereas if you have a place like Utah, you said there are companies that are investing in the state. Or there's something. Is your population growing there? I haven't checked.
Booming. Yeah, booming. I'm not sure if we're the top growing. If we're not the top, we're very close to the top. Real estate in the Salt Lake area where I am is it's just ridiculous. We're having tons and tons of people from California move in, especially. I try not to tell many people about it because traffic's getting worse. I want to keep it a little bit of a secret, but it's Salt Lake City and the outskirts where we live is just an absolutely amazing place. I mean, you can get to all kinds of different climate zones within a few hour drive. If you want, you can get to all kinds of different ski resorts. The recreation is incredible. And corporate taxes are really low here as well. And so we've got massive Amazon warehouses. They are always looking to hire tons of tech companies, tons of startups. The term Silicon Slopes rather than Silicon Valley is starting to really take hold. It's something they've, kind of been talking about for the last several years. But yeah, you drive down, the freeway, I-15 freeway corridor, and it's just lined with massive office buildings and all kinds of different tech companies. So yeah, they're drawing a lot of people. It's making the population grow. It's making the population a lot more diverse. So that would be interesting around here to see how that changes the political landscape, because, 10, 20 years ago, the church controls all of that. Like they have 80% majority in the state House and Senate. Like anything that a liberal would want to do here is DOA for sure, at least at the state level. But that'll be interesting to see how that changes as our population changes in the next few decades. Maybe that will change.
Wow, very interesting. We're talk about a lot of different things here, and I'm really glad we got a chance to do this again. And I want to encourage my listeners to check out Boundless Body Radio, 3 episodes a week still.
Yeah, we're still doing 3 episodes a week. Yeah, Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Man, and if you want any kind of fitness and wellness advice as well, you can get in touch with Casey Ruff and his wife, Bethany, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. And how often is she also on the show?
Well, when we started initially, the goal was she would be on most of them, maybe not all of them, but at least be on most of them. And I always absolutely love it when she's on. She asks really good questions. She's a really good listener. And so she adds something to the conversation, which I absolutely love. But unfortunately, her business is just really booming right now. She just simply doesn't have the time to jump on with me as much as she would like to. She does a form of tissue work. Very similar to Rolfing, if you're familiar with that. But she's actually stepping on people and having them move through a series of stretches, which is called the Rossiter system. And she does that all day and helps a lot of people get out of pain. And so, good for her. She's definitely found her life calling. It just means she can't be on podcasts as often as I would like her to be on.
Right. Oh, that's cool. I'm glad to see that her business is booming too, because I know there was a little bit of a question of what you guys were going to do when the pandemic actually hit, right?
Yeah. No, we've been with that corporation that we mentioned earlier for a combined 20 years. I wasn't going to leave. I had the mindset of like, well, I've built up seniority around here. I get good pay time off, all my benefits. I have a steady job. I've got a steady stream of people coming in that I can pitch my services to. But the rules of the game just completely changed during the pandemic. And I think people quickly got used to working out at home and were really comfortable with that. And they dusted off old equipment. And we ended up deciding to start our own business just so we could pivot around people's changing behaviors. And now we train people from the safety of their homes. We built our basement to be a gym. So yeah, it's different. It's a different world now than it was, pre 2020. And we just had to kind of adapt to that.
That's awesome. I can't imagine how many millions of people have had to adapt in that fashion, right? They're putting their services online, and it's just been great. Another example of how, how history is so fascinating to study, because people will be studying this. Economic historians will be studying how the pandemic shifted the global economy afterwards. And it's something that wouldn't have been able to happen. People teaching online, giving services online like this, coaching online, wouldn't have been able to happen with a pandemic that broke out in the 80s, for example.
Yeah, totally. No, before we took this call, my client, I trained her through the same medium that you and I are talking with. She's in Virginia. I've never physically met her. She's near you. And, technology is a little weird and wonky, but at the same time, if you learn to leverage it, you can come up with new and different ways to do things. And yeah, it's been pretty fun.
Well, that's good to know. And so I guess I was thinking that it'd be people who are more close by you in Salt Lake. But so if people from my region, the West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky, if they wanted to check you out and hire you, learn about your services, how could they find you?
Yeah, so our website is myboundlessbody.com. myboundlessbody.com. You can go there, and on the very homepage, very front of the homepage, it'll say book now or book session. Just click on that. There's a 30-minute complimentary call that we can do. We'll talk to anybody about anything. We'll give you a half hour. Let's chat about what your goals are, what you tried. We can talk nutrition or fitness or whatever you want to yap about is totally fine with us. There's an automatically Calendly link and a Zoom meeting that gets generated. And we offer that to anybody. After that, if somebody wants to train with us, we can train people virtually. We can come up with plans for them for lifting weights, doing cardio correctly. Most people think that cardio needs to be done at a really high intensity, and they learn, through education that working out really hard will burn a lot of calories and burns a lot of those calories from carbohydrates, not necessarily from fat. People learn that they need to do cardio in a lower heart rate zone. But yeah, we do personal training, nutrition coaching, all of that stuff we can do virtually. So yeah, they can just go to our website. Again, that's myboundlessbody.com. Click book now and book a free 30-minute session.
Great. Thanks so much, Casey. And I look forward to listening to your episodes in the future. Thanks for coming on today and having this conversation with me. I think it's been very educational for me, as it always is.
Well, thank you. It's always an honor to talk with you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks a lot. And if you like the show, then give us a review, or if you don't like it, give us a comment as well. We're, again, available on Spotify and on YouTube and Audible and Amazon. Take care, everybody. Till the next one.
So thanks again for listening to this bonus episode of Boundless Body Radio, which was my appearance on the Connected by Controversy with Chris White podcast. As we said before, please, if you don't mind, take a second, rate and review Connected by Controversy wherever you get your podcasts so that more people can find Chris White and his amazing work. And if you don't mind, as long as you are enjoying our show, please give us a rating and review on Apple. It really helps to get this passion project out to more people. Thank you very much. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.